that he's been doing this. I mean, he's an old timer in this community. You've been around now since the 70s, talking about free energy, talking about open source, talking about the fact that we need to get experiments that we can, start replicating and start actually, getting some measurements to. And Jeff's doing that, man. This is what it's all about. So I'm just so excited about that, and I'm really pumped to bring up the next speaker. And I just have to share a story with you. My mission this week was to bring two people in contact with each other, and that happened this weekend. Dr. Gerald Pollack, who's absolutely amazing presentation here yesterday afternoon. I had to change the schedule about 3 times to make sure that his presentation wasn't at the same time conflicting with Dr. King. And we made that happen. So Dr. King got to see Gerald Pollack yesterday, and Gerald Pollack got to see most of your presentation yesterday over at Tesla Tech. So anyway, I'm just delighted to bring up to you our next speaker, Dr. Maury King from Tesla Tech. Come on up. Oh, give me 1 minute. Yeah, I'll get you get a glass of water.
I'll entertain the crowd.
Go ahead.
I want to thank Greg for inviting me here today, and I was just thrilled to meet a number of you and just hear the conversations. It's an effervescent intelligence. I'm drunk on your ideas. There's such creativity that gee, I want to give you guys an applause. It was terrific. What I've put together is. I'm an engineer. I was an electrical engineer, became a systems engineer back in 1974. We had the oil crisis and all the gasoline lines. I coincidentally had a roommate who was in the general relativity. He had that big book by Meissner, Thorne, and Wheeler, Gravitation. In the back of the book, last 2 chapters were discussions of zero-point energy. It was Wheeler's theory of geometric dynamics. And I go, holy cow, he was talking about fluctuations of electromagnetic field energies with extraordinary energy densities. It was down to the Planck length, 10 to the minus 33rd centimeters. That's 20 orders magnitude below the electrons. And I went, holy cow, here I am in graduate school in engineering, and I'd never heard of it. And so I approached my engineering professors in the engineering school, not one heard of it. And I go, gee, why didn't you tell the engineers? The physicists knew about it, so I went over, and sure enough, I met some physics professors and things like that. And I thought, well, I'm going to start up again. So here I finished my coursework, my PhD in systems engineering, and I'm jumping in to graduate physics and quantum mechanics and things like that. And people say, are you crazy? That's all complicated stuff. Why are you doing that? And I said, well, why to learn it, right? To see where they're at. And sure enough, the physicists were stuck too. They knew that the energy was existing, and I asked the obvious question: can we possibly tap it as an energy source? And they go, oh no, it's random, it's chaotic. The law of entropy says you can't do it. They had a model like a heat bath, where everything is independent. And as I looked at the theories of the zero-point energy, I said, wow, how could it possibly be tapped as a source? And then in 1977, like just in the nick of time, l.e.n.r wins the Nobel Prize in chemistry, but it was a system theory Nobel Prize on how a system may evolve from chaos to self-organization. And I go, wow, and it required certain conditions of the system. And those conditions were, it had to be nonlinear, far from equilibrium, had to have some type of energy flux through it. And it turned out that the zero-point energy theories of Wheeler in particular describes an energy flux of the zero-point energy flux, fit the theories of Prigogine. And here I wanted to get my thesis in systems engineering, and Prigogine was a systems engineer. And sure enough, I studied that work. There's a whole bank of work in self-organization, and there's journals on it, on system engineering. And I said, I want to apply those theories to the zero-point energy. And everybody was shocked. None of my professors wanted to deal with it. They didn't know about it, but they knew me, and they were good sports in some cases. But just then, 1979, I get invited out to Eyring in Utah. They were interested in pursuing some of the experimental work, and thus that's where I stayed ever since. We're almost there.
I'm so sorry.
But the good news is I'll be able to go through the slides quicker because I'm telling you the information on the slide.
Give him an extra 5 minutes. I'm so sorry.
Then, of course, I agreed with this. You can't get your thesis unless there's an experiment. And of course, you have to prove this is out of the paradigm. It's not belief. And then what I'm going to share with you very rapidly are slides of what I consider some of the best of the experiments to show that self-organization is occurring with the zero-point energy interacting typically with plasmas. And new work this year show it possibly interacts during water cavitation. And so we'll be looking at some of those experiments very quickly. Excellent. And so these conglomerates involve charged clusters, plasmoids, the cavitation bubble, especially the reentrant jet being emitted from the cavitation bubble. And if this is really true, the implications are that large vortices of plasma likewise cause entrainment in the zero-point energy and creates a coherence in it, actually ends up grabbing a net energy gain out of it. And typically in plasmas, we don't see it because we're not looking for it. It's out of the paradigm. It's forbidden to be looked for in standard academia. So the inventors typically stumble across it by doing the right stuff. Greg, could you pour me a glass of water?
Absolutely, yes.
Bottom button.
Typically throughout the history of science, probably since Newton, there was a belief in an ether. Maxwell's equations was an ether theory. It was typically hydrodynamic in nature. The vocabulary, thank you, of electrodynamics and the vocabulary of Maxwell's equations are basically fluid dynamics, fluxes, things like that. They have source sink models. Was very nice. But in 1905, the Michelson and Morley experiment comes along. Einstein's theory of relativity comes along, and it's very elegant as it unifies the electric field with the magnetic field. And everybody threw out the ether, but they only measured the wind of a static ether. But Dayton Miller furthered the work of Michelson Morley. He worked with Michelson on the interferometer experiment. He made an interferometer 10 times larger. It was 10 times more sensitive. He did experiments on Mount Wilson. At ground level, he got approximately the same result as Michelson and Morley did, but on Mount Wilson, he got evidence for an ether drag theory. As James DeMeo wrote a wonderful paper. It's on the way. By the way, you don't have to take notes because I'm going to tell you at the end how to get all these slides, and at the bottom of every slide is a reference, and you'll get this slideshow and yesterday's slideshow from one website. So along comes in 1930, quantum mechanics comes into play. The vacuum now is a surging sea of fluctuations, electromagnetic field fluctuations. It gives rise to the uncertainty principle, and it gives rise to pair production, a production of electron-positron pairs popping out of the turbulent vacuum. I said, there's my first evidence of self-organization in the vacuum. So look what we have. We have a gap in science, 25-year gap from 1905 to 1930, where it is believed, because of the Michelson-Morley experiment, that empty space is empty. Prior to that, we believed in an ether, and after that, we believed in the fluctuating vacuum, which, by the way, is a much better model for an energetic substrate, because it's modeled more like a turbulent plasma at the microscopic domain or at the Planck domain. Therefore, but this 25-year gap has dominated the belief of all of science. Everything you learn in school, the vacuum's empty, especially the engineers. And the engineers are the guys that do the stuff. They want to see real stuff. So when I was at last year's conference back in Washington with a lot of engineers from NASA, I still couldn't get any traction with it. Their beliefs just block them. They think the physicists that believe in this stuff, oh, they're just kooks too, with the Big Bang and all that stuff. They dismiss them. The engineers, truly in their beliefs, say the vacuum is effectively empty, and I will ignore all ideas associated with tapping it. If you go to the literature, it's well open question what can be done with the vacuum energy. In the beginning, Boyer was the leading proponent in the United States, and he wrote a series of papers that culminated in that all quantum effects can be described by matter's interaction with the vacuum energy. The hydrogen atom could be modeled in Platoff, team with Keshe and others, to show how the hydrogen atom can be modeled from the vacuum energy. It can be an energy source without violating thermodynamics. Very important paper, because when people say it'll violate thermodynamics, the experts say no. It's an open question, you gotta prove it by an experiment. How gravity can rise from it as well, and probably the most exciting paper is how inertia is sourced in the vacuum fluctuations, meaning all the elementary particles are intertwined with it. And if you can start to create a technology that controls the vacuum, you can create propulsion of a sort that we can undergo abrupt accelerations without feeling inertial stress. The model in Willer's geomicrodynamics was essentially a turbulent plasma with electric flux entering and immediately leaving R3 space called quantum foam is what he called it. The flux through any hole, little mini white hole, was on the order of, they calculated from general relativity, about 10 to the 93rd grams per centimeter. It's more like, it's probably infinite. That was just a general relativity calculation based on squeezing it off like a black hole calculation. So what it is evidence is an electric flux, a flux of energy from a higher dimensional space. So can self-organization occur? Everybody said no, it violates entropy. And then Contagious wins the Nobel Prize for saying no, under certain circumstances it can self-organize, and those circumstances have to be nonlinear, far from equilibrium with the energy flux, and that was Wheeler's model. The energy flux is coming from a higher dimensional space. It enters and leaves. If there's vorticity in the flux on the right, it forms the elementary particles. It's like the particles are the whirlpool. They constantly need to be fed by the stream, and the the whirlpool needs the flux to continue always, and the pace of time is associated with the flux. If there is slight tilt to it, we call it vacuum polarization, and if the energy comes through incoherently, that's just the background of vacuum fluctuations. This is the orthogonal flux model of zero-point energy. It's basically John Wheeler's model. Robert Laughlin sees the same thing. He won the Nobel Prize. He wrote this book, Inventing Physics from the Bottom Down, a Different Universe. His point of view is everything arises from collectives, including the laws of physics themselves. The principles for coherent zero-point energy just do what Pringine said to do. Work with a highly nonlinear system like plasma, abruptly drive it far from equilibrium, abrupt pulsing, maximize the interaction with the zero-point energy, typically using the ions and creating vortex forms. Electron clouds make very few, electrons make a poor transducer to affect the vacuum energy. The electron cloud in a conductor is essentially in thermodynamic equilibrium with it. You don't really get much in the way of vacuum activity with normal electrical circuits. However, the ions, the nuclei, have steep lines of converging vacuum polarization, and so any abrupt movement of the ions then starts to kick up the zero-point energy. They see it in the accelerator experiments. They call it exotic coherent vacuum states. They see it in the plasma ion acoustic mode, where the ions are moving synchronously together. The plasma ion acoustic mode is famous for manifesting energetic anomalies. The anomalies often center around a self-organizational event, like a toroid, and they see large radiant energy absorption, high frequency spikes, runaway electrons, anomalous plasma heating, and you're seeing it in the plasma experiments. The type of cluster that's unusual is the inert gas clusters, and in them they can do laser excitation of a mixture of inert gases. When they make the cluster, they get anomalous release of energy. So this inert gas cluster is like an excimer. It's in a kind of a cold plasma state and can be re-excited to release the energy. They see their structure to it. So these are in the standard journals where they're making this observation, typically with laser excitation. And that can be used to help explain the PAP engine, which was running on in a mixture of inertial gases that had to be conditioned by exciting it with lots and lots of sparking before they fed it into the engine. The typical formation of self-organization you see in the plasma is called the plasmoid. It's essentially a vortex ring. Around the ring is a force-free vortex, and it naturally wants to stabilize in this form. And it's like the tip of the vortex connects to the other side and keeps it stable in the vortex ring. Ken Shoulders launches tiny ones with a known charge on a capacitor, a small capacitor. They're all the size of a micron. He realizes these clusters can travel on a dielectric, hit a witness plate, and create craters and damage high melting point ceramics. And he knows that there's excess energy from these experiments because he knows how much energy put on the capacitor. It's very small. The important thing was abruptness in the discharge and getting a liquid melt on the tip of the electrode. He's observed they have the equivalent charge of 10 to the 11th electrons, 100,000 ions. The charge to mass ratio typically always becomes what the electron is. The typical is the charge to mass ratio of the electron, and they contain excessive energy. They can form into chains, which is unusual because they're different charges, but we heard from Dr. Pollock's talk how in a media, right, like charged things can attract as long as there's positive ions in between that cause the attraction. The positive EV is very significant. He didn't make very many of those, but he noticed likewise their charge to mass ratio was like the positron, but it was not comprised of positrons. So Ken believes, and I think he's on track with this, that he is onto the essence of what it is to make a pair, make a particle from the vacuum itself, from the substrate. I think he's hitting on the nature of what's going on in pair production, except at a macroscopic level. We're on the order of a micron here. He sees pairs in his experiments. They call them dual EVs. EV stands for electron volitum, stood for strong charge. He later called them EVOs for exotic vacuum object. Once he was convinced he was tapping into the vacuum energy as part of this self-organized conglomerate. The black EV, after he makes them, they can go dark. And he doesn't see them, but they're sitting on the substrate, and a small electric pulse brings them back to life, and they start emitting light again. His biggest energy anomaly was create a water vortex, a small water vortex through a hole, and shoot one of these EVs through the hole. He said that was such a powerful pulse, he could not find any way to tap it. And he wanted to share this information with Peter Grenou because this was the best of the exploding electrical discharges in water experiments. Peter Grenou is famous for doing that. Peter did photograph a plasmoid form in high-speed photography and was creating anomalous energy, anomalous force, and this experiment is the best. The only problem is he can't find a way to tap the energy. That energy is so concentrated, it damages anything it hits. The analogy he used was like shooting a bullet at a windmill blade. Terrible impedance mismatch. So here's a summary of the charge cluster anomalies. They adhere to dielectrics, they can clump together, they bore holes in the high melting point ceramics. He says that it disrupts the electron bonds is not by heat. The energy's there coherently, it causes the electron bonds just to let go, and then as they fall back to the ground state of the material, then that's when the heat gets produced. And also claims of element transmutation and radioactivity reduction. So when we transmute elements, that's our strongest evidence there's something really energetically strange and anomalous going on, and strong evidence for vacuum energy coherence. So we look at experiments where people are claiming element transmutation for clues. Ken Shoulders was doing it, but at low energies. He presented the work at the Cold Fusion Conference number 10, and he would get nucleosynthesis across the periodic table, not just moving one nucleus over to an adjacent nucleus. He would get this bizarre result. He's not the only one. At Amenko in the Ukraine, at the Proton 21 laboratory, probably they have the best transmutation experiments on the planet. They make a very pure target of copper. They hit it with a plasmoid, a big plasmoid, about 1 centimeter in size, and they create supernucleosynthesis. They call it super because it's like a supernova, and what a supernova does. They're getting transmutation and production of elements all over the periodic table. They have professors hired to study this. They create new theories of the nucleus, trying to explain it. Yet this work is completely ignored in the West. They have a conference nearly every year on ball lightning and cold nuclear transmutation to study this effect. It's well repeated, and it's a shame we won't look at it because we have the quark model, and the Nobel Prizes have been given out. And this strongly implies there's more to a nucleus than the quark model. And then probably the most spectacular thing was that I learned was this year on Mark Leclerc's claim of maybe creating transmutation with cavitation bubbles. What he did was, here's an assembly. It's a very simple experiment. He uses a very beefy pump. That's a 25 mile per gallon swimming pool pump. He rolls up aluminum veneer that has many decorative holes in it. The holes are very important. Puts it in the pipe. Here's it assembled. And there is where he starts the pump with the input valve on the right. So the experimental setup looks like this. He has a water bucket a couple feet below so it can help create cavitation bubbles. He starves that pump down to about 1/2 gallon per minute. The pump emits a loud squeal. He's constantly adjusting the valve to keep it at that acoustical range around 5 to 7 megahertz, just to keep that squeal going, right? And he warns, he says, he gave himself the illness of symptoms like radiation poisoning because he sat too close to it for half an hour or an hour as he was constantly fiddling with the valve to do this experiment. Nonetheless, when he rolls out the aluminum veneer, he's getting a ton of elements. That white blotch is carbon in the diamond form. He's used laboratories to do the analysis. They have nucleosynthesis, once again, all over the periodic table. Unusual isotopes were measured. And he noticed that they were multiples of the helium nucleus. And he says, wow, this is just like what happens in supernova experiments. So the big action item, what Mark wants and why it came forth, is replication for this. It's an easy experiment, just warns shield yourself from it or work the valve remotely and repeat this experiment. If this is probably our strongest evidence. If we can get it that easily, it changes the world. So what Mark discovered, that we have a collapsing cavitation bubble near a surface. It emits the reentrant jet. This is standard hydrodynamics, they know that. In the reentrant jet, there's incredible pressures, and this is where we're building. Under those pressures, like over 300,000 psi, a new form of water appears. It's a macroionic water crystal simply formed from the severe pressures that takes us up into solid state pressures. All of it concentrated in the tip of the reentrant jet. We're at the nanoscale here on that tip. All the energy of that collapsing bubble went into making the reentrant jet. And when that jet hits any surface, it damages it. What Mark learned to do was shoot it through a hole. And then it builds up a head of steam, and then it hits the next plate over, and then it creates the transmutation. So having the holes were important. Here's a model of the water crystal, and at the tip of the crystal is what he calls the plasma shock wave, and that's where he believes the zero-point energy coherence is occurring. And what struck me, that's the same thing as shoulders EVs, the same thing on that tip. And the same anomalies are observed, cutting through trenches through high melting point ceramics like aluminum oxide. The structure has a linear chain of OH molecules, or isomers of water, but it's in a linear form in the solid state crystal. Chris Ekman, who presented at the MPA, there's a paper on him in 2010, found evidence in Brown's gas measurements of linear isomer of water. And so if that chain can close into a ring. It could be stable under perhaps half a micron. And if to stabilize it, it has to be a form of Rydberg matter where the electrons are up at the d orbitals. You have energy stored in a coherent fashion down in a microscopic water bubble or water crystal ring that, when it's ignited, converts into an EV plasmoid. Right? So we have a connection between Mark Leclerc's discovery of this water ring and the EV, meaning that in these Brown's gas experiments, this could be the storage mechanism where we could actually get energy stored in this form of water that we can reuse later. And my first talk over at, yesterday was on this very topic, and that all the slides, and they're annotated with the speaker's comments, can be downloaded from the same website that you'll download these slides from, and you'll have all the information of yesterday's talk written there. So therefore, the similarity between Ken Scholer's EV's discovery and Mark Leclerc's discovery, the anomalies were so similar that we now have, I believe we're dealing with the same phenomena. And it's a miracle, it's an absolute miracle that we could actually store it in water in that way. And all these anomalies around these Brown's gas electrolyzers can be explained by that component. If we get a lot of these entities circulating, we can create coherence by vortex action. The Beltrami vortex, we credit Don Reed, our audience. Let's give Don a round of applause. He's been doing work since the 70s on this. I think he's been terrific as far as... I like to acknowledge my references when they're in the audience.
I got you, buddy.
Go back. So if I did the force-free vortex, he showed a lot of the Beltrami vortex, dug up a ton of support for this idea. But basically the curl is in the vector is in the same direction as the vector, and likewise its magnetic field. It's a natural form. Plasmas want to organize this way. They do pair production in the plasmas. Turbulent plasmas launch pairs, counter-rotating pairs of vortices in the plasma. It's just like pair production in the vacuum. Excuse me. We have these filaments, vortex filaments, that can go into higher order filaments. And you can see structure upon structure and self-organization being built up out of a turbulent substrate. Likewise, they close in the plasmoids. We can look for anomalies in tornadoes. And they're essentially, you can see, they're essentially plasma entities. And we've had these guys last year with you, thunderbolts. The sun, right? All sorts of plasma filaments across the sunspot. Look at that. They have a filament that breaches across the sunspot. That's over 600 miles long as a plasma vortex. All that could be coherent to zero-plane energy. The corona of the sun could be coherent. Right? Galaxies could be coherent. Right? Any vortex form of plasma has an opportunity to cohere the energy. So that could be a dark matter explanation. Who knows? We can make technologies. Lots of free energy machines were invented around this principle. Schauberger is the most famous. He gets this anomaly with a vortex water jet turbine. People were saying it's over unity and things like that. Of course, nobody believes them. And then Wells, with a similar thing, using a working fluid of cooking oil, did the same thing, very similar turbine, presumably being a self-running device. One of the later ones of this last decade was the vortex implosion device by Haskell, who teamed with Ron Rockwell. And you could read about it. I think this was earlier. It wasn't this last decade. And there's a great essay on the Panacea site, how they went wrong. Some of the best of the energy devices, I didn't know about a lot of them, of the last 10 years, they mentioned in this essay. Everybody, they had very big effects. All of them got suppressed. So basically, there you are. This is Don Reed's contribution. That the Beltrami vortex in the plasma is the self-organizing principle. It is the key to unlocking the vacuum. We see it over and over again in different ions, inert gas clusters. We have the charged water gas clusters associated with Brown's gas. And if you can take any of these clusters and further circulate them in a bigger vortex, you can get a further entrainment perhaps. And you can start trying ideas like this. Taking the Brown's gas, dissolving the water, and then making vortexes out of the water. 4 degrees comes from Schauberger. This is the highest density of water. And keep building up the energy coherence. So vortices then could entrain the vacuum energy. It could be that simple. That's the miracle. So basically, the zero-point energy and the self-organization coming from Pringagin's work create the energetic clusters of plasmoids or inert gas, the EVs, and now the cavitation reentrant jets can have it at the tip of those reentrant jets in the water crystal, and then making larger form vortices of plasma and the various implosion technologies. So the real key to changing the world is share the information, get it up on the web, and it would make a new world. Thank you. I have some books over the years. Essentially, these books were collections of my presentations. This book was the most requested presentation because the name, T. Henry Moray, made an energy machine that nobody could explain. And my first name is coincidentally the same as his last name, so it's quite a bit of synchronicity. And here's the website where you can get both of these PowerPoint presentations, yesterday's and today's, as well as all my PowerPoint presentations that I presented on the water topic. And all you have to do is Google water, fuel, ZPE. The first hit will be the PESWiki site. And just tell people to Google that, and the information's up for, with all the references for everyone to share.
Excellent. I think we're going to forego questions because I want everybody to be back here at 1 o'clock so we can start on time. But thank you so much. I just have to add one thing. Is that you think that water ring idea has any connection with the EZ zone? I mean, because he's talking about the organization taking place in the EZs. That's what hit me. Do you think there's is there a location to this water ring, or is it throughout the whole bulk?
Yeah, we have yes is the answer. We have water self-organizing. What Mark discovered under the extreme pressures that he found, he got it self-organized into a solid state form as opposed to just a liquid form. And it's very short-lived unless we can get a ring. And yesterday's slideshow I showed various means where we can produce the small rings. And the miracle is if it's really true, then you have your proof. You have your proof. We're tapping into some extraordinary energy. If you don't like the zero-point energy, come up with something else.
Very cool. I'm sorry, I asked the question. I said there weren't going to be.
Yeah,
but all right, let's break for lunch, everybody. Thank you. We'll see you at 1 o'clock.